We received an email from a worn out entrepreneur, and I'm wondering how Mr. A from George's book, The Next Level Entrepreneur, would answer. Here's an excerpt. I'm very close to pulling the plug on my business. I need to troubleshoot and find reasons we are not selling. Website is not the issue. I think it may be industry-wide based on competitor changes. We're deficit spending right now.
Welcome to the Get Business Savvy podcast. I'm George Black, and I've helped lead 19 companies to over $1 billion in combined revenue.
And I'm AJ Bishop, a starting entrepreneur.
Actually, Mr. A has a whole letter on creativity from disruption. And this guy sounds like he's going through a lot of disruption. So Mr. A is a sage, entrepreneurial sage that Max North, this young entrepreneur wannabe, finds. And through a course of letters, Mr. A gives Max the Next Level Navigator strategic process. The letters are set in the 40s. And Max goes off to World War II, and coming back, actually, just before he gets on the boat to come back to New York City, Mr. A writes him a letter called Creativity from Disruption. And I think there's so much in that letter that could really help this entrepreneur. We should dig into it.
That sounds exactly like what this entrepreneur needs. He needs some creativity in the midst of all this disruption, especially if it's industry changing.
So we know a few extra things about this entrepreneur that weren't included in the excerpt. And one of those things is that his website has had huge issues over the last 3 months, so much so the speed had come down to where he actually couldn't sell anything on the website. And then he referenced that this had been occurring periodically in the previous year. Well, that has a huge effect on a whole lot of things in regards to searchability and Google and all that kind of stuff. Well, he thinks he's got those solved, like recently, we think in the last week or two, but suddenly now there are industry issues.
I think this guy's got to be emotional, right?
Yeah. There's no doubt about it. He is. I mean, you look at the beginning of the quote and he says, I'm very close to pulling the plug, but he just got his website fixed. But the emotion, I think, is coming out of the fact that he's losing money. But he hasn't been losing money in all the previous. He doesn't mention he's been losing money until right now. So we can only assume it's either like in the previous month or maybe it's even in the last few weeks.
I can relate to this situation because when we were negotiating our license agreement, it was taking way longer than we expected it to. And that was making us run right up against the wall of trying to win $25,000. And as we're doing this and as the process is dragging on, it just felt like the walls were caving in and that we were about to lose everything. And everything we were working for was going to be for nothing.
Yeah. No, and this is the thing about disruption. So your licensing process was disrupted. This guy's world is disrupted around his business. So guys, let me share a little bit about what Mr. A says about disruption. And this is from the book. He says, disruption is inevitable. Throughout our lifetimes, all of us will encounter disruptions of some kind. Loss of loved ones, disease, divorce, violence, war, natural or man-made disasters are just a few of the countless life-altering disruptions mortals experience on this earth. Our hope for that ideal life is shattered by disruption. Life as we once knew it has been altered and we are forever changed. And with great disruption is great emotion, perhaps anger, sorrow, grief, fear, pain, loss. Oh yes, much loss. Each of us has a choice as to how we will allow disruption to affect us. Will we be bitter? Will we forgive? Will we be angry? Will we love? How will we respond? And I think that's the question right now for this entrepreneur and maybe for you way back when, AJ, on in the moment of disruption, what do we do?
And George, the way you're describing that, it makes the process of disruption sound a whole lot like the grieving process in terms of loss.
Well, okay. There is a parallel, but disruption happens, okay? And with disruption, there is loss. And so on the backside of disruption, yes, you need to there is some grieving that could go on. And what Mr. A writes right there is a whole lot of different kinds of disruptions human beings can experience. But we're going to dial it into like business and the kind of disruptions like we face as entrepreneurs, because We get hit by all this stuff. And certainly there needs to be some healing and grief. The grieving process brings healing. But let's go a different direction. I want to take you guys to the 1400s in the Renaissance. I like to say that. And there was this church in the center of Florence called Santa Maria del Fiore Cattedrale. And it's known as Il Duomo. And it's very famous today. But back then, it had been almost 100 years without a dome. So if you're watching on YouTube, and most people have seen Il Duomo on the Florence skyline, the big terracotta dome. But I've just put up so if you're watching on YouTube, I've just put up a picture with the cathedral, the bell tower, the baptistry with no dome. And you just feel like it, to me, it looks naked. It's like it's missing something. This was what disrupted the Florentine skyline for a century.
So they couldn't put a dome on it for a century?
Right. Nobody knew how, because the base of where the dome had to sit was the largest expanse anyone had ever tried to create a dome for, and they couldn't figure out how to do it.
That looks really weird for a cathedral, and I could only imagine, what do you do on Sunday when it rains?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. They got rained on. And just imagine 100 years of this. Well, along comes a guy named Filippo Brunelleschi, and he says that he can design this dome without all this great expense of arches or earth. They had all these different techniques people were proposing. He says, I don't need to do any of that. I can build the dome freestanding. And they would say, well, show us your plans. He goes, no, if I show you my plans, then you'll know how to do it and you won't need me. And so I want to be in charge of building the dome. And so I'm not going to show you my plans. And they go, well, how do we know that you can do it? And he proposed a contest. And the contest was that whoever could stand an egg on its end would win the contest, and they could lead the construction of the dome.
And he was able to get people to agree to that? That doesn't even relate to the dome. They were going to buy his wacky plans over an egg contest?
Yeah. No, this is what Giorgio Vasari, a historian of about a century later, or less than a century later, records all of this. So what happened is they had all the masters of the Renaissance, architects, designers, and people like that. And so they brought out a smooth marble table, and they had an egg, and they all tried to get it to stand on its end, and they couldn't. And finally, they all looked at Filippo, and they go, okay, it's your turn. And he took the egg, and he crushed one end of the egg on the marble table, let go, and the egg stood up. And they all just go nuts, right? I mean, I'm kind of interpreting, but they're Italians. So they're just, like, well, if we knew, we could have done that, and he goes, exactly. You could have done that. And that's the same thing with my plans. If you saw my plans, you could do it too. So he won the contest. And so Brunelleschi was awarded the contract to build the dome. And over the next 16 years of building the dome, he faced multiple disruptions. And he would later become known as the father of mechanical engineering because of all the pulleys and ladders and techniques and leveraging and all the different things he did. But one of the things was most fascinating. He was having a problem with the workers taking time off for lunch. You wouldn't think that was a big deal, but this dome was really, really tall, and to get up there took a lot of time. And so if your lunch was way down below, or you had to go back down to the ground to get your lunch, it was taking way too much time, and he had to devise something. So this was disrupting the construction. And so what he did was he built a cafe on top of the dome. I mean, this guy, so creative. This is creativity coming out of disruption.
And that's incredible how it's almost as if those disruptions need to exist to bring out that creativity in us. Because without the problem, no one needs to think of any solution. And Brunelleschi just seemed to be plugged into all sorts of creativity as each problem came up about to him.
Right. I think that's a pretty fair assessment. Let me show you a picture of the finished dome. So if you're on YouTube, you can see a picture of the finished dome, and it feels like the building's complete. And here's what's fascinating about this is it is the largest masonry dome in the world, even today.
And the fact that no one else has been able to replicate it to this day speaks to how impressive his creativity was out of that disruption he faced.
Yeah, and others have observed, and it's not from this angle. We're looking at it from the end of the cathedral. If you take a side view of it, and that's what most people see as a side view, there's actually an egg-shaped quality to the dome itself. And it's not for certain that's intentional or that's Brunelleschi just poking those guys in the eye with an egg shape, and he had the egg contest. We don't know. But here's the thing. This is a great example of creativity coming out of disruption.
And especially coming up with that creativity when you had no reference points. No one had done it before. And I can relate to that as an entrepreneur. When I was starting out, I'd never done it before. I'd never negotiated a license agreement before and tried to bring a product to market. You don't have reference points. So you feel like you're trying to create something out of nothing.
That's a really good example, because and that's walking into disruption, and I think successful entrepreneurs, like you observed a minute ago with Brunelleschi, disruption is how they create. We don't think of it this way, but it's really good. And so when you have disruption, and there's different levels, and I get into that in the book, there's the lack of reference points, and for entrepreneurs, we almost thrive in that, like you were observing with Brunelleschi, and he creating all of these things as he kept facing more and more disruptions. With disruption, you'd think, oh, well, there's really basically two responses. I can have a negative response, I get despairing or whatever because of what's happened, or I can have a positive response and, let's fix it. But here's the third response that I want to suggest, and that's create. In the face of disruption, if you think create, it changes everything. So Mr. A raises this question to Max. So how does one begin to move forward into creativity? And he keeps writing. Well, first, please know that it is human nature after disruption to ask why. I can assure you from my personal experiences that this question will never lead you to creative choices. Even if the question were completely answered, it will lead nowhere, not even to more understanding. Instead, ask yourself this question: what now? Or more precisely, what path now? It will begin releasing greater creativity. For this question, what path now, begs one to look up and outwards towards the horizon of their desires, which begins to release one's imagination. The question why turns one inward, seeking explanations. So, in other words, guys, disruption is disorienting. So we must see things truly as they are, not feel them. And when you start asking, what path now, you begin to let rationality begin to take over, and your emotions kind of have to step aside.
I like how you put that, especially in the context of Mr. A saying, don't ask why, because in the middle of all that disorientation, you being able to correctly assign why is going to be difficult to do because you're disoriented. I like the question, what path now? Because that's forcing yourself to orient yourself in the midst of all that disorientation. You're picking a direction and you're starting to at least go on that path. And I'm sure as you go on that path, you'll start to uncover why. But that'll just be part of the process of answering what path now.
Yeah, because what happens is in disruption, you lose your direction. You get disoriented, okay? And I'm always saying, like, where are you headed? And with our next level navigator and all of that. So when I come back in the midst of disruption, and we're going to apply it to this email here and see how this works. But when I say what path now I'm like, okay, I've had a big disruption. I'm disoriented. I've got to go back and rechart a new course.
And sometimes when it's so disorienting, like our email, that new course, the first one that our desperate mind goes to is, well, let's just pull the plug. Let's just close business, close up shop. We're running a deficit for a couple of weeks now. It's all over. The people aren't coming. We can't sell anything.
Right. And that's the problem. You've got the emotion baked into this thing. And so pulling the plug, guys, is not a direction. Okay. It's just not. So it doesn't mean it's not an option. It just means, well, let's look at this other stuff. What's going on? Well, the website's solved. Well, really, it's not the issue. Okay. That's true. So what else is the issue? Well, the problem is when I start looking, I go like, well, wait a minute. I know from my experience in leading companies, the financial isn't, you don't just suddenly lose money. You can know this is going to happen. I've done this with companies. I've seen it coming and we've averted it. So the question, what path now, forces you to come up with actions. Pulling the plug on the business is not an action. Okay. I mean, it's not a creative solution. So I've got to get rid of the emotion, settle down, and look, if I'm setting direction, I'm going to say, well, what do I have to do? I'm in this mess. I've got deficit spending. Okay. Well, how many units do I have to sell? Do I have to sell 10 or 10 million? Because it feels like I've got to sell 10 million when I'm reading this guy's email. In reading some other parts of this, I don't think it is. I don't think it's a big number. In other words, he's just started to go into deficit spending. My experience is you're not going to have to sell much to get back above water. Okay. That changes it a lot. If it's 10 million, okay, well, maybe you should pull the plug. So the other question is, well, the industry is changing based on what? What are your facts? There's sort of an implication. So this is a hunch that the industry is changing statement is probably based on one or two little stories this guy's heard. Okay. I don't think it's based on broad-based data, but here's an action you could take. If that's what you think the industry is changing, and look, lots of industries are right now. Okay. Lots of stuff's changing. Do a survey. Survey your existing customers. You can put a survey that pops up on your website. You could put a survey out on social media and see what kind of responses you get. Do all three. You're going to get 3 different sets of data. If they're all trending in the same direction, that tells you industry's changing or it's not changing like I thought it was. And what is changing in the industry? And so it's like, you've got to be very, very careful conclusions you draw and what you base them on.
And I think that's a perfect example of how by starting to answer what path now, you also figure out why. Like if you start sending out surveys to as many people as you can and start collecting data, now you've charted a path, you started to take action, and you're getting answers as to why this is going on. And that data can help inform your positions rather than at the forefront of it, hearing a couple things and just being like, oh, it's all changing. We got to figure this all out. And I think I might as well just pull the plug.
Well, yes, in a sense, first of all, it's like when you read that excerpt, it's speeding along with, I might pull the plug. I'm losing money. Industry's changing. Website fixed. It's like, whoa. This is a big jumbled mess. And it's like, it sounds to me like trying to explain the deficit spending, and it's no longer the website. It must be the industry's changing. And I don't think you get a why to that. I think what you get is what's going on. A more precise way I would say it is what's going on with people. And I'll bet you anything it's not this conclusion. In other words, there is a shift happening in the industry. I would bet that's true. but the conclusions he's drawing are incorrect. That's going to be my hunch. That would be my hunch.
And once he figures out that shift, he's going to have an opportunity to create and to take advantage of knowing what's shifting.
Exactly. And so by just calming down and you're like, what path now? You do need some more facts and you do need some more information. And you realize that. And so you gather that so that you can begin to create. Because the fundamental concept here with disruption is, look, everything's changed. So I can create this or recreate this however I want to. And so you have tremendous freedom. And that's the exciting thing about it. And as long as you can control those human emotions and not fall off the cliff in depression or despair or discouragement, any of the D words, right? And don't pull the plug, guys. Please give it a chance. All right. So play with those concepts. I hope this has been helpful. In fact, this is one of the reasons I'm launching the Business Savvy Guided Mastermind. So we can dig in with you one-on-one in a small group of 12, maximum 12, and deal with your issues that you're facing, plus provide you some business savvy curriculum, which includes Next Level Navigator and numbers and things like that, so that you can create profitable and sustainable growth. And to give you a taste of this mastermind, we're offering a free webinar. Just click the link in the description or go to getbusinesssavvy.com, sign up, grab a free spot, and you're going to hear stories of how I've led companies into exponential growth and how you can take that and apply it in your business. And if we have time, plus ask questions that you have about your business. So check that out. And also take a look at last week's video on how to find a great CPA. I know you're going to love it. And until next time, may you live truly free.